Today is another day of a tough topic to talk about, which pertains to the residents and the families and the communities right here in New York State. Back in January, during my opening remarks at the start of the session, one of the items that I talked about that we needed to really focus in this session is the epidemic of heroin abuse in our state. According to the Department of Health, in 26 of New York's 62 counties, heroin-related deaths have doubled between 2010 and 2014. It's terrifying. Too many lives are being lost. Too many families are being devastated as a result of heroin abuse. Over the last several months, and you'll be hearing from a couple of our members, the Assembly Republican Conference has held a series of hearings throughout the state in different communities to get their input as what can we, as a state legislature, do to help. And whether it's prevention, cure, or also prosecution of those that are preying on members of our community, the dealers. So there's a multiple-prong approach that we're going to talk about today. 2 weeks ago, the Senate passed a bill package to combat the heroin crisis. As you can see to my left, Senator George Amador is here with us today, one of our former members that we miss. But certainly, at the time that the Senate Republicans or the Senate majority was passing those bills regarding the heroin crisis, in this House, right behind me, the Assembly Democrat Conference passed a resolution honoring Cheerios. I think this is a type of nonsense where the people of New York say, when is it ever going to change? We need to take serious action to address a serious problem where lives are being lost and lives are being affected in our communities. The governor has a task force, still gathering information, but the time to act is now. The Senate has led the way in terms of actually passing legislation. We're calling for the Assembly majority to take up this legislation before the end of June, before we leave here. We have 9 session days left, and it's time for everyone to come together and take up serious proposals to solve a serious problem. So I'm going to introduce a couple different speakers today. I can talk more about the work that we've done, but also the families that have been affected here today. So first of all, I'd like to introduce our task force chairman, Assemblyman Joe Giglio. Joe.
Good morning, and thank you for coming this morning. When we were tasked to do this, it was fairly overwhelming because we knew the statistics and we knew the problems throughout the state, whether they be rural, suburban, or urban. And when Assemblyman Al Graff went out on the road, we heard stories that would break your heart. These are not stories that you would like to hear. They were not stories you wanted to take home at night and tell your wife about or your children. But they were real stories that was going on out there. Both Al and I are from law enforcement, but we both knew that would not be the only answer to the problem. So we've traveled the state, listened to parents, grandparents, recovering addicts. We listened to everybody in the rehab community, and we came up with a plan. We brought that plan to our conference, and we showed it to them. They agreed with the plan, and we brought it forward. The only thing we're missing is a sense of urgency here in Albany. But for some reason, we're not moving with the speed we need to move, because every day we hesitate is a day we've lost someone, and we can't afford to lose anybody. We went to a place where we saw pictures that looked like they were prom pictures that somebody had brought in. They were the youth that community had lost. Like I said, heartbreaking. So it is our hope that before the end of this session, we get an opportunity to pass the very bills we need to make it better. We tried to do it in the budget. We'll try to do it now. But this is an ongoing battle. It doesn't end even with passage of these bills. But we need to pass them first because it's a step process. We need to get them into detox. We need to get them into recovery, and we get them into long-term recovery. That's our goal here, nothing more. This is not partisan. This is just good-hearted, common-sense legislation that has to pass now. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I'm going to introduce another one of our members, but before I introduce Al Graff, I do want to mention that all of the Assembly Republican members of our conference have participated in this process, either through the task force hearings themselves or providing input and feedback to the task force report that we have put out on behalf of our conference. So I would personally like to thank each and every one of our members for their input, for their participation as we've gone throughout this year. So Assemblyman Al Graff, I'd like to introduce you next.
Thank you, Brian. Simply put, the time for politics is over. There are people dying out there. There are families that are being destroyed. There are communities that are being devastated. Now is not the time to play political games. Now you're going to get, there's a package over there with the heroin report. The heroin report's been reviewed by people in the industry, and they've come back and what we've heard is it's the best report they've seen out there on the topic. Along with that, you're going to have two bills, one from the minority and one from the majority, that give parents tools in order to help their children, gives family members tools to help their family members, and there's a comparison between the two bills. I would suggest you take a look at the package, you take a look at the differences. And what I'm going to say right now is the press has a responsibility here. It's your job to sit there and shine a light on this. It's your job to take a look at the bills that we give you and help to advocate, help to educate, help to get people to come forward and start yelling and screaming, get this done. So the time for gamesmanship is over. We have a responsibility to our children, to our communities, to our parents, to our grandparents. And you know what? You people are the ones that are going to get our message out there loud and clear. So if we don't do it, more children are going to die. If we don't do it, more parents are going to be grieving. If we don't do it, communities are going to be devastated. It's time to act, knock off the nonsense, and let's get this done.
Thank you all. Our next speaker is Patty Farrell. She's a parent, and she lost her 18-year-old daughter to a heroin OD, and she's been a strong proponent of Larry's Law. So, Patty, why don't you take the stand next?
Good morning. Thanks for having this. Thanks for spreading the word. Like has been said, a couple of weeks ago, the Senate passed a wonderful package of heroin bills. At this point, it's going to be up to the Assembly to get Larry's Law through, which is an enforcement bill to get the drug dealers and drug killers off the streets. If we don't take action in the Assembly and the governor doesn't sign, it just causes more deaths, more suffering, more families going through unbelievable things. The loss of a child, the loss of a sibling, the loss of a parent has got to be one of the worst things anybody could possibly experience. The Senate stepped up. They did what they needed to do. It's time for the Assembly Democrats to step up and do what they have to do to save the kids. I mean, our kids are dying. That's our next generation, and our next generation is our future, and they're not going to be here if drug dealers keep lining their pockets and walking away and getting away with murder. They're bringing dangerous drugs in here, they're feeding them to our families, and they're walking away, and they're having a ball with all the money that we line their pockets with after they kill our families. I want to thank everybody for holding this today. Thank everybody for supporting, and especially Senator Amador for taking on Larry's Law, and I thank you.
Thanks, Patty. As I mentioned earlier, our former colleague in the State Assembly and now State Senator, I'd like to welcome to the podium and for a few comments. George?
Well, thank you, Leader Kolb. And, you know, it is indicative of what we need to do. As lawmakers, we need to do everything we can possibly do and the quality of life issues for the state of New York. And this is not a drug dealing problem alone. This is not just an addiction problem alone. This is the ultimate public health, public quality issue of New York State. And it's a crisis. The heroin use is skyrocketing. Deaths skyrocketing. But not only just the specifics of the addiction problem itself, but think about the effects it's having in our communities. Crime increasing. Foster care increasing. It is a quality of life issue that we need to tackle, and we need to tackle it now. Patty Farrell is a mom who lost her child, a child who graduated high school at the age of 16. Someone who was intelligent, someone who was energetic, someone who had a lot going for her. But she was bound by an addiction, and that addiction took her life. And so we need to do everything we possibly can in engaging the four-prong approach that we talk about. Advocacy, education, prevention, absolutely key prong. We need treatment and making sure that we have the insurance providers giving the ample insurance so that our people who are struggling with this addiction can afford to go into treatment. We need to have treatment more accessible in all parts of the state. We need recovery services, and I'm so glad to see Bob Lindsay here from the recovery groups that really represents what I believe the sustainability approach that we need to take in the recovery. But we also, the last and most important prong is all about enforcement. Passing Lurie's law will go a long way in helping curb the flow of this narcotic, of this deadly poison that is on the streets. It's just not on the urban streets. It is in every corner of every county in the state of New York. So I call on the Assembly to pass Lurie's law, to take the four-prong approach serious, and as well as the governor and his task force, and look at all of the task force recommendations that the Senate, that the Assembly have put forth, and now the governor, to put forth meaningful legislation and public policy to change and help the quality of life in New York. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last speaker, before we take any questions, I'd like to introduce Bob Lindsay, the CEO of Friends of Recovery New York. Bob?
Thank you very much. And I really want to echo the comments earlier about the important role that you as media play in this effort. I want to thank our members of the Assembly for their leadership here in bringing this to your attention. Friends of Recovery New York, as an organization, brings a voice to individuals and families living life in recovery from addiction, families that are still struggling, and families who've lost family members. Personally, in my extended family, I have 11 family members living life in recovery. The reality is that we have inundated the public with this desperate message. We have not balanced that message and talked about recovery. We estimate 23 million Americans are living life in recovery today. There is hope, there is help, but only if we make the investment and pass the pieces of legislation that are needed and necessary to provide those tools and resources for individuals, for families, and for communities. Insurance is a desperate issue. Countless families have talked about the desperate situations that they've faced trying to access treatment for their family members only to be denied. Being denied access to detox services. Being denied access to recovery-based community services once somebody leaves treatment. They've gotten the foundation, they need recovery support in the community. Recovery community organizations, recovery community centers, family support navigators to help families. Plain and simple, out there in the community, we are fighting a forest fire with a garden hose. We need the tools, we need the resources. Millions of families across this state stand ready to partner with the Assembly, with the Senate, and with the governor in a bipartisan way to enact those pieces of legislation, the funding support needed and necessary, and we can, in that process, save countless lives. Appreciate your being here and the focus of this effort.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator. Thank you.
Before I bring back up Al Graff and Joe Giglio to answer any direct questions you might have about the task force findings, you know, you heard from Patty. It's tough to lose any member of your family or member of your community in this state. The pain and anguish that Patty and many other families in this state is just too many. One is too many. And that's why we're talking here today to bring a sense of urgency to the State Assembly and to the governor to work in conjunction with the Senate that's already passed their bills to do something significant in the next 9 days. I have not lost someone personally to heroin addiction or overdose, but a member of our family, our Assembly Republican family, did. He was on a local segment, a local TV station not too long ago. Nick Willock lost his brother Stephen at the age of 22. And when Nick was brave enough and courageous enough to show his grief and pain, just like Patty has and many others, it is really tough to sit there and watch and not feel Nick's pain, Patty's pain, their family's pain, the grief, the mourning. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of our prime duties as a legislature and also the governor, is to protect its very citizens that occupy the boundaries of this great state. We shouldn't be here if we can't do something immediately in the next 9 days to save some lives. And a corrective action can be done. As mentioned earlier, this is not a Democrat-Republican topic. This is truly a people topic for our state. And that's why we feel so strongly about being here today. As I mentioned earlier, we've been talking about this, we've been working on this all session long. And yet we haven't heard anything from the Assembly majority. Well, we want to hear from the Assembly majority now about what they're going to do. Because this is a time of year, ladies and gentlemen, if you're familiar at all with the legislative process, and if you're not, it can get pretty ugly. And what I mean by that is there's hundreds of bills that are brought up in this chamber especially that are one-house bills. We call them one-house wonders. They have absolutely no chance of becoming law between now and the end of session. And precious, precious time is taken up in committees. Precious, precious time is taken up debating bills on the floor so that some members can go back to their districts during an election year and say, oh, see what bill I got passed? Although that bill didn't get passed in the other house. This is the type of subject and the type of task that we should take on, should be a priority over doing household resolutions, about doing one-house bills. All of those things are a complete waste of time. Doing something today or in the next 9 days to help our communities thrive and live longer and not have lives shortened by a devastating drug and a devastating drug community. So this is a call to action today. And Assemblyman Graff was right. The media that's covering this event today, we're going to ask you to do your own call of action, to talk to other members of the legislature, especially the Assembly majority body, as to say, what are you going to do to help solve this crisis or put action in place to deal with this crisis right now? Not next year, right now in the next 9 days. So with that, I'd like to call back up Al Graff and Joe Giglio to take any specific questions any of the folks here have regarding the task force or its findings. Questions?
So there's a lot of consensus that this is a problem coming on, or it's not a partisan problem, it's Democrat, Republican, what have you. But there doesn't seem to be any consensus on the solution. Everyone's got their own task force, there's all these different proposals. I mean, what's the roadblock to coming to a consensus on the solution?
Well, there's an old saying by Harry Truman, it's amazing what you can get done if you don't care who gets the credit. The problem is, there are a lot of people here that are worried about getting the credit. So, I mean, we've been pushing this forward. Joe and I have been doing this for over a year. We've heard heartbreaking stories from parents. We've handed that report to everybody that we could. We handed that report to the governor, the head of Oasis. We've handed, you know, some of it has been implemented administratively, but there's so much more that we have to do. And the thing is, you know, this is Albany. Politics is the word of the day. And we have to get people to stop playing politics and do what's right for our kids and for our communities and for our neighborhoods. And, you know, it can't be, especially on this topic, it can't be politics as usual, or it can't be Albany as usual, okay? We all have to work together to solve this problem. And, you know, sometimes, you know, we have to push and push to get everybody on the same page, and that's what we're working for.
Do you get the sense that, maybe this is a question for those in the Senate majority who are here as well, do you get the sense that there are any negotiations or discussions that are ongoing beyond the task forces that we've seen from the Senate, from the governor, and here? Any multi-party discussions?
Oh, we get the sense that the discussion's ongoing. The Senate has done their work. They've showed us the same answers. The governor's doing his task force, continuing to do them. We think we're all pretty much on the same page. What we don't understand is what the holdup is. And, you know, again, it's Albany as usual, probably, but at some point we have to push that aside and get to the point where we do what we're here for, something good. And the Senate has done a good job. Senator Ort's here. Senator Amador is here. These guys have been pushing as hard as we have, and the governor's been pushing hard. So I guess the question remains is, as Al said, who gets the credit? Well, we don't care. We just want something done so that we can move forward and continue to move forward, because this is only step one. Even if we implement everything in our reports, we still have a long-term recovery to look at, to make these people come back and be useful members of societies and have their families treasure them again. Those are important things, and those are the things we're working towards.